This might be my most difficult review to date. And the reason is simple. There is just too much to cover. There's too much biblical exposition, wise argumentation, and logical reasoning to squeeze everything I want to say into this review without going far longer than what I like. If I had to give a single word to sum up my thoughts on Calvinism, a biblical and theological critique, I think the word I would use is thorough. This book is thorough. It does an excellent job covering all of the bases as it relates to Calvinism and why it is a flawed system of interpretation. The indexes at the back of the book covering name, subject, and heading are so important because this book covers so much ground. Owning Calvinism a critique is just owning one book, but it's kind of like owning an entire encyclopedia, all dedicated to lifting the scales off of the eyes of those who read the Bible through the distorted lens of Calvinism. Thanks to the thoroughness of the indexes, you don't even need to read this book all the way through to gain the insights from it. Just buy it, have it available, and whenever a Calvinist uses a term that you're unfamiliar with or takes a verse out of context, Calvinism will help you to understand their terms and to take that Bible verse and place it back in its context. Buy Calvinism a critique because it covers all the ground with experts who are deeply passionate about the subjects they cover. Welcome to Rev Reads, your home for Christian book reviews from the perspective of a pastor. If you're new to the channel and want to discover more enlightening and informative books, please subscribe so that you can stay up with my most current reviews. And if you're a regular to the channel, please like and share this video. A little thumbs up goes a long way in helping other people know about the excellent work that was done by Alan, Lemke, and the others who have been pulled together to expose the errors of Calvinism. Now let me give you a little advice on reading books and maybe reviewing them if you want to do that as well. In order to profit the most from your reads and to be able to explain them well to others, you need to be able to overlook or at least de-emphasize some places where you might disagree with the authors. Specifically, those places where you disagree with the authors, but they're not impactful to the primary goal of the book. Now, I gotta say, a book with 14 authors who come from several theological camps, everyone is going to run into places in this book where you get a little frustrated by the views of the various writers. For instance, there's Klein's chapter on election, which was excellent. I love how he brought out the nature of election in the Bible, starting with the Old Testament and then working his way through the New Testament. Also, his exposition of John chapter 6 was some of the best in the entire book. If a Calvinist trips you up with their take on John 6:37 through 40, you must read what Klein writes on John 6. And then on top of that, his two simple paragraphs on predestination. Beautiful. But Klein also believes the church is the new Israel. Sorry, I'm not buying that. And then also that the elect obtain salvation as they persevere through life's trials. I don't think any of the elect obtain their salvation by persevering through trials. Instead, it is by faith in Jesus Christ. You enter through the door that is Christ by faith, and at that moment you are given his life, along with that the promise that you will never perish. It's not about enduring trials, it's about resting in Christ. So there were a couple of places in the midst of Klein's excellent 30 pages that I couldn't stand. And everyone needs to know going into this book, there are going to be moments where you, if you're like me at all, you're going to end up thinking, How could this guy believe that? I was loving everything else he was saying. How could he come to that conclusion? And if you're like me, you'll probably have 20, maybe 30 of those moments in a 500-page book. Don't dwell on those moments or allow them to ruin the book as a whole, because overall, this book is a gift. And even better, it is a gift that no one is going to force you to read it by irresistibly changing your desire so that suddenly you want to read more critiques on Calvinism. God is giving you the freedom to decide if you want to read this book, and I believe you should. Mainly because it achieves all the goals. Everything that it's aiming for, it hits all of them in this critique on Calvinism. I also think people should view Calvinism, a biblical and theological critique, not as one book, but as getting two books for the price of one. I always like that reasoning because it makes me feel like I'm getting a better deal when I'm buying something. But the first 5 chapters of the book are a must read, and I think it should almost be seen as its own book. The first 5 chapters has a critique of the famous 5 points of Calvinism known as Tulip. And anyone who is being confronted by Calvinists, or if you're weighing the merits of Calvinism, or you attend a Calvinist church, I think you gotta read those chapters. If you suspect that your newish pastor in your church is trying to weasel Calvinist theology into your church, you gotta read this too. The rest of the book, though, sections 2 and 3, I think should be more viewed as a buffet. So if you're a Southern Baptist, Pinson's chapter on Baptist dissent against Calvinism might be very important to you. But if you've already read Ken Wilson's excellent work on Augustinianism, you might skip that chapter. But if you haven't read Wilson's excellent book on Augustinianism, you gotta read that chapter in here. Olson also brings the fire in chapter 11 on the character of God, but bringing that fire isn't everyone's cup of tea. But if you're passionate on the issue of critiquing Calvinism, you might find Olson's chapter to be your favorite in the entire book. I think Olson was the best at revealing just what is at stake at this debate. I think I would also make the case that maybe Roger Olson's chapter should have been the introduction of the book to get all of our fire and juices flowing right at the beginning. Little's chapter on evil is a wonderful work on suffering in this world, a much, much needed addition. It's far more instructive than I expected a work on this subject of that size to be. A lot's been written on that topic, and Little provides an excellent addition. But if you've read a ton on that, maybe this isn't a chapter for you. I'm simply trying to make one point on this book, and that is don't view it as a 500-page book. Instead, view it as a 225-page book with tons of excellent bonus material. That's all available for you, and read what you think is the best for you. I think this book is far more accessible than it might appear to a lot of people. And one thing that's kind of funny to me is that I've even gone this far into my review and I haven't even mentioned the chapter by Ben Witherington. His chapter was one that I almost skipped because it's on a Wesleyan critique of Calvinism, and I'm not a Wesleyan, so I didn't really care much about it. But then I thought, Shawn, you're reviewing this book, so you better read the whole thing. And it turns out that my favorite moment in the whole book was when Witherington's chapter. And if you want to know what that moment was, you can watch my review with Alan, Lemke, and Flowers as they also review their own favorite chapters in this book. Calvinism, a Critique is a much needed and welcomed addition to the arguments put forward against Calvinism by those in the church. I think we need more books like this one released by our various Christian publishing houses. So you need to go out and buy a copy of this book so publishers can see that these books are wanted and desired in the Christian marketplace. So when it comes to Calvinism, a Biblical and Theological Critique, get your copy today.